So my name is Sarah, and I am an information and digital services librarian at the Bracebridge Public Library. Um, and on behalf of all of the Muskoka Libraries, I would like to welcome all of you to our event, and even people in Arizona. So this is super exciting because we can have people from all over join us. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to Muskoka. Um, as our commitment to the Truth and Reconciliation Promise and Process, we begin this event by acknowledging that Muskoka is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Chippewa and Ojibwe peoples, and the Algonquin. We also recognize the Wana Mohawks who relocated to Muskoka in 1881. The Williams Treaty of 1923 and J. Collins Land Purchase of 1785 cover the territory that we live in. We recognize the historic and present contributions to the province and the country of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Today, I am super excited because we have New York best-selling author Pam Jenoff with us. You might recognize her from her other books, like The Lost Girls of Paris, The Orphan's Tale. We have another poll coming up here. Let me see. Have you ever read a book by Pam Jenoff? So you'll see that on your screen and you can say yes or no. Because if you hadn't noticed, this book that we're talking about tonight is her 11th novel. So she's written a ton of books. She also has a great website with all the books and a lot of resources on them for book clubs. So if you're in a book club and you want to use her book, check out the book guides because they are amazing. So that's on her website. You'll also learn about her career because Pam Jenoff has had such an interesting career. She studied history at Cambridge. She's worked in the Pentagon. She's worked for the US consulate. She was an attorney, and now she teaches law at university. So we are so excited to have her here today, and welcome, Pam.
Thank you. And I love that poll. I've never had a poll about my books before, and that was super informative. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it looks like most people have read your books before, so that is great. So can you tell us a little bit about your newest book, The Woman with the Blue Star?
Sure. And a more organized author would be holding up a copy right now of my book. But I bet you are. See, there we go.
I gotcha.
That was awesome. I've been doing this giveaway of 12 days. I'm giving away 12 different books. And so I have all these books here. So my latest is buried under the stack of my older children books. So my latest book is called The Woman with the Blue Star, and it is set, as many of my books are, during World War II. And this book, as the others, was inspired by a true story. And I don't write true stories, I write fiction, but there's usually a nugget of truth that sets it off for me. And in this case, the true story was that there was a group of Jewish people in Lviv, Poland, or it's sometimes called Lviv. It's sometimes in Ukraine. It was in Poland then. And these people survived World War II by hiding in a sewer. And I don't mean hiding like they stopped there on their way out of town, but hiding that they stayed in that sewer for about 14 months. And when I heard this story, I had so many questions. Who were these people? How did they survive? What were their lives like? And who had helped them? And I was also taken with a particular anecdote from the real story of a young girl who looked up through the sewer grate and she saw a girl her own age buying flowers. And she was so struck by the disparity between her life and this girl on the street. Her mother said to her, "Someday there will be flowers for you." It was this kind of promise. And so hearing this, I imagined what would it have been like if the girl in the sewer and the girl on the street had the chance to meet one another, and what would that have meant for both of their lives. And so in my book, Sadie is a young woman in the sewer. She goes in with her parents, but finds herself increasingly alone. And Ella is the girl on the street who is not Jewish. And at first glance, her life looks pretty good. She's from an affluent family. She's not being persecuted. But when we get to know Ella, we see that all of her family is gone, except for a really awful stepmother who's consorting with the Germans, and her fiance, who has not even told her he's back from the war for reasons who become apparent. So these two women are both kind of looking for something when they lock eyes and begin this very unusual friendship.
And you mentioned it's in Poland, and you actually worked in Poland with the U.S. consulate. Did you think about writing historical fiction before you started working there, or
I
was that something that came out of your work?
Well, I had always wanted to be an author, and that's a much longer story. I'm happy to tell you that one afterward if you want to know. But what happened was about 25 years ago, I was sent to Krakow, Poland as a diplomat for the US State Department back in the 90s. And although I originally went there to kind of stamp visas and passports and help Americans if they got in trouble in Poland, it was right after communism had ended, and Poland and its neighbors had all of these issues from World War II that they'd never been able to resolve when they were cut off from the West and their free speech was stifled. And so all of these war issues kind of bubbled up in the 90s when Poland was a new democracy trying to join NATO and the European Union. And so I was in Poland, and I'm personally Jewish, and I had become very close to the Holocaust survivors in Poland. I'm halfway around the world without my family back when we had no cell phones and no internet. So I was alone, and I gravitated toward the elderly survivors. And the US government saw my relationship with these people, and they said, okay, you work on all that stuff from the war. And, we're 8 Americans in Krakow. It wasn't very formal. And so for 2.5 years, that was my job, working on war issues on the ground in Poland. And as you can imagine, this affected me. It was very difficult and very rewarding, both professionally and personally. And I came back from those years in Poland knowing I wanted to write a book set during the war. If I think back to earlier years, I always read a lot of historical fiction. And if you think back then, interestingly, they were mostly male authors, I think. I'm thinking of James Michener, Herman Wouk, and Leon Uris, and John Jakes. So I always read a lot of historical fiction growing up, but it was those years in Poland that kind of collided with my wanting to be a writer and set me on that path. My answers are super long.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Do you, so you heard all these stories and you got all this information. Do you find that you still have to do a lot of research on them, or is it mostly based off of the stories that you've heard? Just your writing in general, because I mean, so many of your books are based off of Poland in that time.
So it's interesting. I don't seek to write real stories. I actually think, first of all, they're not my stories to tell. But second of all, real life sometimes makes terrible plot, but it makes for very good setting. So I never want to stake too large of a claim around what is real in my book. There's like a historical inspiration and then a fictitious story. But of course, there's still a great deal of research that needs to be done. Now, I'm going to say of my books, only maybe 3 of the 11, I might get that wrong, but 3 to 4 of the 11 are set in Poland. So Lost Girls of Paris and Orphan's Tale were more based in France. Different stories in different countries. I even have one set in the United States. And so every book requires a lot of research. And research can take many forms: secondary sources, newspapers and original documents. There's a lot of different ways to get at it.
Definitely. And I mean, it's a story that I hadn't heard of before. And I think that's great, just even pulling these little sources, because everyone gets to learn something new. I don't know how many other people had heard about this story, but we don't have very many poll questions. This is one of our last ones, so don't worry, they won't keep popping up. But I'd be interested to know how many people knew about this story, because it's an amazing story. I mean, in the Yes, the real story, 21 people went into the sewers and only 10 came out, which is heartbreaking. And I mean, the whole time period is completely heartbreaking and really dark. How do you um, balance that as a writer to bring out those, I guess, the truth and the feelings, but still bring about some hope and some light?
Well, one of my goals, and this really comes out of the years that I lived in Poland, is show the gray areas in history. So I try not to write the broad brushstrokes that we learned in school. I try and really find those nuances. That includes the good in people, that includes the bad in people, that includes things that were going on in their lives. Sometimes people say, well, your characters have romance. Well, oftentimes they're young women, and that was what was going on. And people laugh and people live. So I don't see it as overall dark, right? I mean, obviously the period is extremely horrific and tragic, but there were people living and doing great things. And when it comes to the sewer, even just that, here's how I look for a story idea. If I can find something when I'm researching that makes me gasp, makes me go, after 25 years of doing this kind of work, then I'm hopeful I'm onto something that will make you feel the same way. Definitely the case with the sewer, because I had never heard of it, so that's always the starting point for me. It's like the aha moment.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm just looking at the poll. 18% of people knew about the Jewish people living in the sewer before reading your book.
I
So
did not.
um, I definitely did not either. Um, I've heard a rumor that your book underwent some serious revisions.
Yes, I mentioned that, I think, in the author's notes. So this requires some explanation. I don't know if anyone's heard that there's generally two types of writers. Plotters, those are the dear souls that write like in chronological order and they make all the sentences look pretty. And then there's pantsers like me, and we write by the seat of our pants, and we throw down a bunch of words like, bleh, and someone once called that throwing up on the page. I'm sorry for anyone who's eating, but that's what they called it. And so when I write a book, I kind of just like pants it and I throw it all out there, and then I edit it. And The Woman with the Blue Star is my 11th book, and it's the first time I turned in a book, and my beloved editor said, nah. I was like, nah? Like, what happened? And so I had turned in a real stinker of a first book that I turned in. And the result was that I had to rewrite 95% of The Woman with the Blue Star in about 5 months. Now, that is not an experience I want to go through again. So now I do an outline at the beginning. Not that it can't change, but at least we make sure we're on the same page.
Has writing during the pandemic been a lot different from you, or how has that been
Well,
going?
I'm going to tell you a story about how it all started during the pandemic, and then I'm going to tell you what I guess how it is now. They say how it started, how it's going. I'll tell you how it started, and then I'll tell you kind of the takeaway I got from writing during the pandemic. So when I got that nah from my editor about the stinker of a draft, it was December of 2019. So I was like furiously plowing along on this rewrite when COVID hit. And one of the things I did in the rewrite is I moved the story from Lviv to Krakow for a whole bunch of reasons. I know Krakow, I think it's more accessible for readers. I wanted some distance from the real story. So I moved my story to Krakow, and I thought, well, I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons, and I'm going to go to Krakow, because I had lived in Krakow, but I had not been back to Krakow in 17 years. So I booked myself like a really nice mom only trip to Poland, like a good seat on the airplane and a nice hotel. And I was like going to go see all these people. I was so excited. I booked that ticket for March 12th, 2020. Okay. So as COVID starts hitting, and my editor said, well, we don't know if you should go, I was like, I am going, and I'm going to wear like, what are one of those mask things everybody's talking about? Because we didn't know. The flights all stopped going on March 11th, going over there. And thank goodness they did, because on March 12th, I had an emergency appendectomy. So I would have been in the air on my way to Poland when that happened. So I came home from the hospital a day later, and the whole world was shut down and no one left again, right? We were home for like 8 months without leaving. During those early months of the pandemic, I did not work. My kids were home. We got a pandemic puppy, and I like didn't work for months, and it felt horrible. It was that feeling of like when you don't exercise and you just feel kind of gross, you know. So what happened was in September of 2020, the kids went into online schooling. I put the puppy in daycare, and doggy daycare is a really big thing with authors. Many of us use it. And I started working again. It was the best thing ever. I felt so much better on every level. This made me realize that women, especially, spend too much time apologizing for working. We justify it, we treat it as our free time, we feel guilty about it. And work for me is like self care. So the biggest lesson out of this pandemic was not to apologize for working. Yes.
I know everyone's been busy, and I couldn't even imagine adding a puppy to everything else
We have
too.
a dog, a cat, a bird, and a lizard, and 3 kids, but I only take care of the 3 kids and the dog. The others are not my job.
That's good that you can do that.
Yes.
Um, one thing that we have in Muskoka is a lot of aspiring writers and a lot of writers. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process and
Sure. So I am, as I said, a pantser. I am an early morning writer because when I decided to get serious about writing, I was a brand new attorney with a job at a big firm and a lot of student loan debt. And so I always had to write from 5 to 7 in the morning. So my first druthers is always that like pre getting ready, crack at it in the morning. I will tell you when I'm very busy on a book, and I am right now, 5 a.m. becomes 4 a.m. And I hate that. Like I am miserable when I'm on the 4 a.m.s because there's never enough sleep. But I love early morning. I will tell you, I am a short burst writer. So if you give me 8 hours a day, I don't know what to do with 8 hours. I need lots of little chunks. And so I will do, if I have a full day, I'll do 3 or 4 smaller chunks, and I will try and apportion the tasks based on like, I'm going to write in the morning when my brain is the freshest, but then in the afternoon, if I'm tired, I might use that time for research. So it's that kind of process. Now, in terms of aspiring writers, here are my 3 tips. Be really disciplined with your writing time, protect it, because even after all these years, no one, not my most sainted and supportive husband and mom, say, honey, go take some writing time, right? Nobody does that. It doesn't happen in our lives. So you have to find your time. 2, you must be tenacious. And what I mean by that is I started in a writing workshop, many more talented people than me in that workshop. I'm not just being modest. This is true. I'm the one who's published because I just kept knocking on the door for all those years until someone let me in. And the last thing is you have to learn how to revise. And this is where being a former attorney has given me a lot of help because people were always marking up my work. And you have to learn how to take feedback where people give you problems, not solutions, and you have to incorporate it in your own work. So revision is very important, I think.
yeah. I was just taking a peek ahead at our Q&As. So if people have questions, just pop them in the Q&As. And one of them was about writing and the process. And Paula asked, how do you develop your characters in your books? So Stephen King used Post-it notes on the wall. Camilla Good said that the process is organic and she doesn't name her characters until the end. Do you do anything special with your characters? And how, like, what I was wondering is how do you decide, like, about who's gonna die? That's a horrible thing. Like you're not quite
Right.
to like George R. R. Martin level. Like we're not at the red wedding, but like it must be horrible to put so much time and effort into these people and then
Yes, brutal. So in terms of characters, I don't do any sketches or interviews of my characters. I'm more to the organic side. And someone once said that if plotters are building scaffolding, pantsers are at an archaeological dig and they're like holding up something and dusting it off and seeing what it is. So I really get to know my characters through the throwing down of the words, like kind of as I go. In terms of killing people off, as a pantser, I don't like it. The end doesn't come at a certain point. I have an opening scene. I have some idea where I'm going, but things can change along the way. And sometimes, so I'm surprised by who lives or doesn't live. Harder than living or dying is, believe it or not, there are characters that you don't ever find out what happens to them, right? People that like ambiguously end. That's the real world. Sometimes we didn't find out what happened to people. And so I want to reflect that as well.
Oh, wonderful. Um, are you working on any writing projects right now?
Always. So I don't let myself start a new book until a book is like truly edited and finished. It's kind of like, you got this big mess of thing, and then you've got that like really cool new toy in the corner, and you're not going to get to play with the new toy until you put away the ones you've got out. So, but once it's actually my editor's like, okay, we're there, then I will move immediately, like within a day or two, to at least finding the new project, and then getting, I find an idea, I propose it, and then I get started. So I'm very excited about what I'm doing right now. For a while, I'm usually an open book about my projects. And a few months ago, I was like a little squirrely. And then I realized it's already in the reading guide for Woman with the Blue Star. I've already said it. So my next book is inspired by a true story of the only known sabotage of a train headed to Auschwitz. So there was a train that was going from Belgium to Auschwitz that was sabotaged. And partly my book looks at that train, as well as some other things, which I'll keep secret for now.
Well, it's great that you can find all these little nuggets
Thank you.
that that people haven't even heard. I mean, the only train that's
Only known train, or the only
only,
one I've heard about. I never want to overstate it because someone's going to write to me and say there was another train, and they'll say it really publicly.
that must be the tricky thing about writing historical fiction is that there's so many historians and there's so many people out there who um, are probably criticizing every little detail about buttons and coins and all that stuff.
Yes. So it's funny. I do want to say that people often ask if I wish I could do anything differently, like on the early books. And I will say, when I started out writing, I sort of felt like I wanted to be like J.R.R. Tolkien, like where I could create a world. And as long as my world was plausible, everyone should go along. And of course, that's not the case. So when my first book came out, I really thought people would be upset about like Emma, the commandant. And they really were writing to me about like, would Jacob have worn a yarmulke as a secular Jew in 1939 Krakow? And so we went into the second book and we had these conversations. I'm glad you said coins, because we were like, would a bus in 1946 London cost a 2 pence or a 5 pence to ride? And would it have had doors? So readers, to their credit, really hold you accountable, sometimes more publicly than they used to, but they really hold you accountable. And so this last book, I'm going to tell you, I had a Krakow expert, a language expert, a sewer expert. I had every, like a historical expert, and the mistakes will still be found and they will still be all mine. And I will tell you, you mentioned the Red Wedding. I always take great comfort in the fact that somebody left a water bottle on the Game of Thrones set. That was a mistake. So I take a little comfort in that.
Yes. I Whenever I think about historical fiction, um, I have a favorite author, Tim O'Brien, and he was writing, he said, a thing may happen and be a total lie. Another thing may not happen and be truer than truth. And that's what I think about historical fiction, is that a lot of times it's about putting you in a place and feeling those emotions. And when you definitely feel those emotions with the book and the characters and, finding love and all these other things that are going on. And sometimes it's more about the feeling than how much a bus cost. But
I'm trying to figure it out.
you're doing a good job. Kind of in that note, Paula has another question. Do you read your reviews? I guess you hear some of it, but
I do read all my reviews. I mean, as they get voluminous, I may not read all of them, but yes, I actually really do read my reviews. I read, Goodreads, I read Amazon, I read all, as well as the print reviews. I read everything. And you know what? Even though sometimes people can be mean, people can be really mean, but if you read them enough, sometimes themes come out of them. Like if people keep saying, I didn't like this, then you're like, oh, like I know I have certain, part of being a writer is knowing you have certain weaknesses as well as strengths. And sometimes reading those reviews helps you to identify those weaknesses.
Andrea has a question. She says, I'm curious who gives you feedback about your writing. Is it family, friends, or just the publishing world?
Well, I will tell you, many years ago when I started in a writer's workshop, and that was amazing because I had a teacher and I had peers to critique. I don't do that anymore, partly because I don't have time with the kids, and partly because the pace at which I write would be faster than the workshop would help with. But that was wonderful in the beginning. Now there are only two people who give me feedback. One is my agent and one is my editor, and they're brilliant and they're always right. And even recently I was remarking, I have this moment where like the editor says something and I start like cursing to myself because it's so like kill your darlings, it's so radical, and then 5 minutes later I'm like, gosh darn it, she's right and she's a mad genius. And it's always like that. So my agent and my editor, they're my dream team and they're everything. Now, once a book is like pretty far in production and I have a galley, it would next go to my mom. She's like the next person who's going to get the book. And I also have a very dear sort of book influencer friend. She runs Great Thoughts, Great Reads, and she often gets a pretty early look, but those are really when the books are in production already. Just my editor, my agent, and the mom.
We had another question. Someone asked, have you ever been approached for any of your books to be produced into a movie?
I used to call that question from your mouth to God's ears, right? Because it never happened. And then it actually happened very suddenly for Lost Girls of Paris, which was my previous book. And it was optioned for film, and that option has been changed to a limited run TV series, as many things are these days. Still just an option. So as people know, it's a long way for an option to actually seeing anything on the screen. I did have a really good Zoom several months ago with the screenwriter, who was brilliant. I was supposed to be telling her things, and screenwriters are so good with storytelling that I was like scribbling notes as she was talking. So if anyone could make it happen, it would be this particular screenwriter. Stay tuned.
That's exciting. Do you think that will change the way that you're approaching other books in the future? Like, will you think, oh, maybe this could be a movie?
You know, it's funny. People say my books have a cinematic like feel, but at the same time, I don't necessarily write topics that are super popular with Hollywood, and nor would I shift because my first loyalty is really to the readers, not to the film world. And so film is great. It's not the game changer for me. Like when that movie option is going on, I don't hear anything for months and months and months, and that's great. Like they'll tell me if there's something, but it's not part of what moves my world. It's the book that'll do that. So.
I've noticed this book and a couple of your other books have I don't know if it's a future flash or a past flash, but there's a couple different timelines that go on. Is this just something that you enjoy writing or that you have found worked, or is it, did you have another reason for playing with that?
Well, there's a few ways you can do this, right? So you could write a book all in the present or all in the past. Or you could write a book, and I've done this once, only The Things We Cherished, where the book goes like past, present, the whole book. I've done that. But what you're talking about is really bookending, where there's like a prologue and an epilogue that's maybe set a little bit or a lot in the future. And that does a few things. It allows you to put the story in context, and it also allows you, if you're going to sort of seed a mystery that will be answered at the end. So I like it as a writing technique. Not every book has it. Not every one of my books has it. I don't think I did it in Lost Girls of Paris, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's definitely some, mysteries and some twists, which are always fun. We won't say that because, as we found out in the poll, most people haven't read the book yet, although a lot of people, a surprising amount of people, have already read the book. So that is great. I think, just finding it again. 42% of people have already read the book. So
Well, thank you.
that's
Canadian readers have special place in my heart. I love coming up there pre-COVID and getting to visit. So thank you. And libraries. Can I just step back and say, since this is a library event, I am a library devotee. Before COVID, I was using 5 library systems a week between my research and my kids. And in June, it was my 50th birthday. And on my birthday, I celebrated by taking my kids back to the public library for the first time in a year and a half. So very special to me. I was at the library today.
That's great. And it works into Andrea's question. What are you reading for pleasure right now? Or do you have time between dogs and boys and lizards to read for
I
pleasure?
boys and girls, but I look, so it's feast or famine, not because of time, but you know where you go through a phase where like you want to read everything, and I'm going to be honest, my library holds have not come through, so I've got 5 or 6 books I'm waiting for. I do, but where I find time to read is in the pickup line at school when I was dropping off. That's my secret place to read. Always have a book in the car, and I I read across genres. So I read like all of the the World War II and the historical, but I also read suspense. I also read um modern. So I don't have I mean, gosh, what would I name? I'm really excited. I've read galleys recently from Allison Richmond and Erica Roebuck and Jillian Cantor of forthcoming books. I really liked in the past few years Ghosts of Harvard by Francesca Saratella. Eternal by Lisa Scottolini was very good. Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane was a particular favorite. I'm going in no particular order. However, here's what I want to say. Every time before publication, I do something called 100 Days of Books, where every day for 100 days, I post a book that I loved. And then I make a Pinterest board with all of the books on there. So if you are interested in any of my reading lists, come find me and I'll show you where to find the Pinterest boards.
Yeah, that sounds great. Um, would you ever want to branch out with your writing and do something like a super thriller or a like hardcore mystery or anything like that? Or are you pretty happy with
Um,
historical
you
fiction?
know what? I wrote 2 modern books of my 11 and one that was half and half, modern and historical. So there are lots of things I'd like to write about that just don't work in the 1940s, but I'll tuck those away for right now because my readership is very much centered on 20th century historical fiction. And as long as there are really great stories to tell and I feel that I can tell them respectfully, I'll stay here.
Yeah. I mean, we love it because then we get your books. So
Super. I got plenty more to say.
no complaints here.
Thank you.
At the beginning today, you said that you would maybe talk about why you became a writer.
Sure, I would love to tell you this story. So, I was one of those little kids who always wanted to be a writer. Never poems, never short stories. I always wanted to write a novel, and I would try and show people my work and all of that. But through those many years of living abroad and being in school, I had plenty of time to write, and I never got started. You know, you all have that one project in your closet, and you're like, I wish I could do this, and I couldn't do it. The turning point in my life was actually 9/11. So I had come back from diplomatic service and gone to law school, and I started practicing law at a big firm in Philadelphia on September 4th, 2001. It was a Tuesday. And 1 week later, 9/11 happened. And I had this life epiphany where I said, Dear God, I don't want to die at the law firm. And what I meant, I think being a lawyer is like a fine and admirable profession. I teach law school, I make baby lawyers. That's what I do when I'm not writing. So I love the law, but I also had a deeper dream of being a novelist. And if I had been a 9/11 victim, I never would have realized my dream. So I took a course in Philadelphia at a night school. It was called Write Your Novel This Year. Seriously. And they later called it Write Your Novel This Month, which I would not have taken. That sounds super scary. But I took Write Your Novel this year and I started in that workshop. That would become my first book. It was not a hop, a skip, and a jump from there to the library or bookstore. It was 5 years, 39 publisher rejections until one publisher, my current publisher, made an offer 11 months after we had submitted. So it was a very long road to publication, as well as still having the day job at that point, which I still do.
I think everyone these days needs to have multiple jobs.
Right? The side hustle.
Side hustle. It's a big side hustle
It
to
is. They're both side.
turn out
They're
novels.
side by side hustles, right?
Did you have any authors in particular that kind of influenced you or helped you along the way?
So the amazing thing is the authors who support us. So I will tell you a fun story, and then I'll tell you about some more authors. I was crazy for Judy Blume when I was little, and my fifth grade yearbook said the next Judy Blume. I still have it. And so about more than 20 years ago, when I was an aspiring author, I had emailed her, and she very kindly emailed me back with advice and this and that. 3 summers ago, my family and I were in Key West, and she has the bookstore in Key West. And I walked in there and she was there, and it was like, this is better than the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. I lost my mind. And she was so gracious. First of all, I still had the email from 20 years later, and I showed it to her because the email was exactly the same day, July 10th, 20 years earlier. So I got to show that to her, which was incredible. And she invited me back, and I stayed at her house on book tour. So I love her. But beyond Judy Blume, there are amazing, amazing writers who are supporting newer writers, like putting that ladder back down for people. And I'm going to say not exclusively women, but there's a lot of women helping women. So when I think about those super gracious, helpful authors, I have been helped by Lisa Scottolini, Kristen Hannock, Christina Baker Klein, Mary Kay Andrews, Jodi Picoult, and the list just goes on and on. And so what I want to do is then pay that forward to writers coming up.
Yeah, no, that's great.
It's very special.
Yeah, I mean, I got little goosebumps when he was talking about the Judy Blume and the email being on the same day. That's
It
just
was wild. It was really wild, very special.
I think we have one more question in the Q&A, and I will remind people, if you have questions, please pop them in there.
They're scared off by my long answers.
No, it's good. What is the title of the book that takes place in the US?
Oh, so that is called The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach. And I love this book. And I was actually I just spoke down at the Jersey Shore it was my first speaking event since COVID. And it was right near where this book was set. So I was talking a lot about it, but it is World War II on the home front. It's about a young Italian girl who emigrates to the United States during the war, and she's living with her aunt and uncle in Philadelphia, and in Atlantic City, she becomes very close to an Irish Catholic family with 4 sons, right as the US enters the war and kind of changes everything. So it's a very personal book to me because my mom is from Philadelphia, where one part is set. My dad was from Atlantic City, where the other part is set. And so it's fascinating to learn about the war in Atlantic City, like, blacking out the boardwalk lights and training the troops at Camp Boardwalk. It's really fun. So it's called The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach. And all of these books are on my website.
Wonderful. So we'll just, I guess we'll go back to the book, and
Yes.
the one with the blue star. Was there anything that didn't make it in the edits that you kind of wish now that did, or do you have any
On
regrets
this
about
book,
that?
it's funny. Here's the thing. I don't have specific stuff because I've gone through so many iterations, I'm not even sure. But one of the things about writing historical fiction is you don't want to do a history dump. So I don't want to, like, just because I think something is super interesting, I don't want to stop the story. So when I wrote The Orphan's Tale, which is 2 books ago, which is about a German circus that sheltered Jews, I was amazed to learn this rich history of Jewish circus dynasties in Europe that were wiped out. These big families with like 13 and 14 children running circuses, but that wasn't my story. So I was able to make it the backstory of one of my characters, but you can't do it in one place. You have to kind of like take that and sprinkle it lightly throughout the story. So it's not what I lose, it's what I get to keep, but you don't notice it. That's what I prefer.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Do you ever put things in other, like, would you come back to something in another novel, or do you kind of have, once it's done and it's written, then you're
Well, I
on
mean,
to the
some of
next
my
one?
books are related. So I've written prequels, I've written sequels, and that's a way of tying books together. There are also some ideas that I would like to write about that maybe my publisher, for whatever reason, is not so hot on, like it's not the right moment for that book. And I tuck those away in a drawer, but I don't tell you about them because I don't want someone else to write them. I want to write them someday.
That's fair. That has to be tricky though, but I guess you're working on something all the time, so that has to help.
Yes, always. I mean, a day or two. When I'm done, I'm going to sleep for a day or two before I start the next one. I'm tired.
Oh no.
If I sit down, I'll fall asleep.
How long did it take to write The Woman with the Blue Star? How long is
Well,
you?
So the woman with the blue star is an aberration, right? Because you have the original draft and then you have the 95% rewrite. So let me say, in general, I used to write a book a year, like this when I was younger. I'm older, the books are harder. And so I have slowed down to about 18 to 24 months. And I love that because not only is it better creatively, I think it's better commercially. It takes so much to put out a book, from my publishing team, my social media network, my friends and family. And I can't hit people up like that every 12 months, better to step back, pay it forward for a while, and have a book be more of an event. At least that's how I've really enjoyed that slow down a little bit.
And then of course you have to come talk to people like us.
I love it,
But
especially the Zoom thing. My goodness, not that I wouldn't kill for a trip to Canada right now. It's been too long.
no, it's beautiful in Muskoka right now. Although we've
I
had lots
bet.
of mosquitoes this year.
This
But
year, a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of flies, a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of everything. Yes, here too.
no. So you're talking about like putting them out. Have you ever thought about writing a book with another author? And that's a question from Paula.
Oh, so what's interesting? I was part of an anthology called Grand Central about 7 years ago. And so this was not writing a book together. This was 10 female historical fiction authors, and we each contributed a short story. And all of our books passed through Grand Central Terminal on the same day in 1945, kind of like Love Actually. The stories are combined. And that was very fun. At first, I was like, well, I'm not a short story writer. And then I saw who the other authors were, and I was definitely a short story writer because I wanted to be part of this incredible project. But actually, writing with another author, I mean, I'm not a collaborator. Like, I kind of like keeping my head down, and as I get older, I like staying in my lane. Isn't that terrible? I love my lane. And so it would really be difficult for me. I'd never say never, but I'm pretty happy with this right now. There's so much going on that just maintaining this is enough.
Yeah. And I'm sure, I mean, writing from different perspectives and everything that has to add to um, being a little bit more creative without having to deal with
Every book,
somebody else.
every book is different, and every book has its own challenges. It's always like starting over again.
That's that's a lot. That's really tricky.
Well, but
But
let me say this. The one thing I've gotten over 11 books is like, I know I'm going to start, I know I have an idea, and I know it's going to feel terrible. And then at some point, the sun's going to shine through and I'll be able to see it. Now, that moment can be delayed by months, but I do have confidence in the process now, even if it's difficult.
I think that's one thing, because this is we've been doing a series with these author talks, and we've been hearing from authors, and it's just a lot of work. Like it's great for us as readers, because I mean we get to pick up the book.
Right.
You can even pick up the audiobook, and you don't even have to like do the work of reading it. You can just listen to it. But I mean the amount of time and effort and hours that it's taken, we really appreciate that.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. I often think that I don't think even the people closest to me maybe grasp like the quantum of hours that it's going to take to actually write a book. And so I could say to you, like, I hope my next book is going to be out in early 2023. And you'll say, wow, that's really a long time from now. And to me, it's terrifyingly soon because of everything that has to be done.
Would you even want to take longer with a book? Like, do you have more of a say, or is it up to the publishers? Or
Well, I mean, there's book contracts and there's deadlines. I'll put that deadlines because, they're a little fungible. But you don't want to go too long because you want to stay in front of people, right? So there's that piece of it. And my publisher does a really good job of re-releasing my older books with like fabulous new covers. So they re-released The Diplomat's Wife last year, which was incredible. They're re-releasing The Winter Guest this December, which is nice. So I don't want to go longer than I'm going, and they don't want me to go longer than I'm going. My publishing team, but I'm kind of enjoying this particular spot.
speaking of re-releases, someone asked, what character have you missed the most?
Ooh, that's really interesting. I don't miss them. Is that terrible? Like, I don't miss them. It is like when you're by the time you were done a book, it's like I guess I'll miss my kids when they go to college, but the characters in the books are kind of like obnoxious teenagers at a point, right? So I mean I miss them. There's a couple books, interestingly, not my most commercially successful books. I'm going to be really honest here. There are a couple that are particularly I'm fond of that so there's one called Almost Home, which is a modern book, and it's about a woman going back to England to solve kind of she's a diplomat, but she's going back to solve the mystery of what happened when her boyfriend drowned during college at Cambridge. That is a very nostalgic book for me. I did not have anyone drown, but I went to Cambridge, so that's a book very close to my heart. The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach is a book that's very close to my heart because it's got so much family in it. So I don't miss characters, but there's a couple books that I have a fondness for that probably outweighs how well they did.
No, that's fair. You mentioned your children. Paula wanted to know if your children like to write.
They do. They like to write. They like to read. One of my children keeps swiping all the galleys that come in of other authors' books, so I have to make sure they're appropriate. So they do like to write, and they are more appreciative of my career as they get older. When my son was little, I saw him walk up to an older woman at a park. I was like, "Why is he talking to a stranger?" So I kind of walked over to listen, and I heard him say, "Have you read any books by Pam Jenoff?" Giving like no indication that he was my son. And when she said, "No, I haven't," he rattled off the whole list in order. So I certainly am very grateful for the support and the enthusiasm.
That's wonderful that they can help with that. Joan asked how you balance family and writing.
Poorly. I do too many things that I'd say none of them well. I'm sort of joking, but like this week, I think it's Wednesday. I had a family member with surgery on Monday. I had a child home with a screaming ear infection today. It's been a little bit of chaos. But I will say I only do three things. I write, and I teach, and that's it. And even if I hit the lottery, I would still do all three things. I'd slow down a little, but I'd still do all three things because I really do love every which thing I'm doing. So the truth, the real, like behind the scenes, keeping it real, I live in squalor. I mean, if you look, you see this shoji screen behind me, it's because you can't see what my house looks like because it's so messy. I'm not kidding. So I have a messy house. My mom is a mile away. My husband juggled babies, and that's it. The whole village. And yeah, that's it. Anne Lamott said before children, she couldn't write if there were dirty dishes in the sink, and after children, she could write if there was a corpse in the sink. So you just kind of do it. Yes.
Oh no.
And the puppy's barking. I can hear it downstairs. And there was drama earlier about someone touching someone's ice cream. So yes.
Life goes on, whether
Yes.
we want it to or not. Oh, yes. There's a comment that says clean houses are overrated.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Someone once said build the children first and the house second, and I took that very literally. So
Um, we so 38% of people have never read a book by you. Who answered our poll. Where should they start if they wanted to? Should they start? I mean, obviously, they're all going to go and
right.
either purchase this from the library by contacting them tomorrow, or borrow it from the library. But if they don't start with The Woman with the Blue Star, if it's out, what should they start with?
Well, first of all, thanks for being here if you haven't read my books. And the good news is there's 11, so there's no shortage of things to read for the near future. So really you could start anywhere. If you want something heavier, you're going to go with The Woman with the Blue Star, maybe The Orphan's Tale, or Commandant's Girl, which was my first book. If you want something more spy thrillerish, I would go with The Lost Girls of Paris. If you want something lighter and more nostalgic, maybe The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach. But I would also look for that re-release of The Winter Guest, which will be in December.
Wonderful. And I know this is a horrible admission, but your books have always been super popular at the library, and they've always been out. And before I was asked to moderate, I hadn't read your books before. So I went on like a huge book binge. And I listened to the audiobooks of several of them, and they were all great. So if you can't get the, the print copy, if you do audiobooks, the narrators are wonderful. So check those out.
Thank you.
And then we're at 7:53, so we're closing up. So if there's any last questions, please answer them. But is there anything else that we haven't talked about your book that you are bursting with that you'd like to tell us about?
No, aside from saying thank you, I do want to add that one of the greatest things of this social media age has always been the ability for readers and authors to connect in like a really sustained and meaningful way across the years, and even more so this past year and a half when we all had to pivot to the virtual platform. So I really do encourage each and every person to find me wherever you are hanging out online, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email. I'm doing a giveaway right now where every day for 12 days I am giving away one of my books, and you can still enter every single giveaway. So that is on all of those platforms as well. So I hope to see you. That is it.
And definitely, I mean, if you have a book club or something, the book club guides are amazing. So check those out. Oh, we had another question. Can you choose who narrates your books?
I always get given a clip of narrator and I give my opinions, and I'm really bad with audiobooks. So I'm usually not, they usually don't follow my opinions. I will tell you without spoiling anything that The Woman with the Blue Star was hard because there's two women, and there's a point in the book where you don't know which woman is speaking in the book. And we were like, well, which narrator are we going to use? Because one's going to give it away and one's going to be a lie. So it was very tricky.
Yes. I noticed that because everyone's name is at the top of the chapter, and all of a sudden
one chapter, it's not. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I mean, thank you so much. And the next time you're in Ontario, then pop up to Muskoka, and I mean, any of the libraries here would be more than glad
to have you. That would be great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.